Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. I guess there was a little thing called an election that happened a couple of weeks ago, and that's brought a whole bunch of people out to these meetings. I'm going to share a screen to tell you a little bit about NWSOFA. Just to give you a little primer, NWSOFA stands for Northwest Suburbs Organizing for Action. We originate these calls from the northwest suburbs of Chicago. That is the land beyond O'Hare. We are an indivisible chapter. There are over 6,500 chapters across the country. There's a map on the screen right now. Each one of those little dots is one of the chapters. I can tell you over the last couple of days, there have been a ton of new chapters. People that have 5 to 10 people that are joining, that are creating new chapters. So there's a lot of interest and energy going into this. So NWOFA has an interesting, we call it the Twin Snowflake organizational module. On the left-hand side is our communications module, all the different things we do to get the information out to you. On the right-hand side are our issue teams. And very first one started with gun violence prevention back almost 12 years ago at Sandy Hook. We added healthcare to that. Then we added immigration reform, social justice, standing with women, fiscal and economy. We have strong climate change and several ROD groups, which is Restore Democracy groups, that work on voting rights, elections, gerrymandering, vote by mail, and confronting disinformation. And all these issues and all these communication groups are managed by a team of 24 all volunteers that work constantly on bringing the newest information to you and accurate information. We tend to call them our secret sauce. Tonight, we have our fiscal and economics team, Karl, Faulstich, and David Doney, and they are our co-leads for fiscal and economics, and they have been doing these presentations for just about 10 years now. And they just haven't got it down to a great science. They present the data, they present the information, but they are open for questions. With that, let me take this off. And David, you can bring up your presentation.
All right, thank you. Let me share my screen. All right, so thank you very much for attending. Appreciate it. We are going to go through what we typically do is we help you understand what the facts are. So we talk through data from the most credible sources we can find. So the Congressional Budget Office, we use the Federal Reserve data from their FRED database. You'll see many graphs from there. So we're not picking Breitbart and other or far left sources for what we talk about. We're talking about the main economic data that you guys are seeing from the best sources possible. So we help you sharpen your arguments. So when you argue with your friends, you've got the best data, best charts available, and communicating to your audience in any venue that you see fit. We encourage you to share these slides, whichever ones you like. Very easy to do. And we'll talk about perhaps the cutting tool at the end. If you're not familiar with the cutting tool on your PC, you can easily take a screenshot of anything and share it on social media very easily. So obviously we just had this election and we're going to go through what happened, kind of what was happening leading up to the election from an economic and a polling standpoint. I would encourage you, many of you are going to want to talk through this section. I would wait at least until we hit the break. So when we get to the end of this section, we'll definitely take 10 minutes or 15. We'll see how the conversation goes and talk through this. But once we get that done, then we'll go into our more standard update where we systematically go through the different parts of the economy and update you on exactly what's happening in those areas. Everybody has a pet theory on what happened in this election. Some of us are right, some of us are wrong, and the fact is we probably don't know yet. We might not know for a little while until things have settled. But we're going to give you what we have, what's available right now. And I included this picture from The Economist magazine, which was from a few weeks before the election, saying the U.S. economy was the envy of the world. And we'll talk through some of that data. This is one of the best economies in our lifetimes. And perhaps we weren't able to capitalize that in this last election. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why the perception about the economy and the reality are so different in this case. The polls going into the election were pretty much tied, very close with the swing states toss-ups. And as you know, usually a 1% victory for the Democrats in the popular vote is not going to be enough. It might be 2% or 3 or 4, depending on the circumstances. So this was an extremely tight election, and you know how polls work. They are simulations, meaning if you ran a simulation, if you ran 1,000 elections, Harris would have won 490 of them to 480 for Trump. I mean, it would have been very, very close regardless. And so certainly the result was not something that was inconsistent with the polling. Now, going in, we had an absolutely fantastic economy. And what this chart shows you, along the bottom is the unemployment rate, and along the top, along the vertical part, is the real or inflation adjusted hourly wage. Whenever you see the word real, that means adjusted for inflation. So you'll see us use that word real a lot. And so inflation has been considered in these numbers. Biden has the highest real hourly wage and the lowest unemployment rate of any president for data back to 1964. This data was through August of 2024. That didn't change with the September or October data. It's the same story. And better than Trump, you have to go all the way back to LBJ for an unemployment rate in this 4.0 range. So it's a fantastic economy by historical standards. The Congressional Budget Office, which is the most credible data you can have, said something incredibly important before the election, and it was actually back in May. They said that across the income distribution, whether you're the bottom 20% or the top 20%, you had more purchasing power in 2023 than 2019. So Trump's best year, 2019, we had better purchasing power in 2023 than that year because incomes outgrew inflation. So no matter how much in the news you heard about inflation, what was also happening was incomes were also growing, and they were growing more across the entire income distribution. That doesn't mean that every single person is better off. It means that the vast majority are better off across the entire spectrum of incomes, low to high. And what the chart is saying is that you could buy the same stuff you bought in 2019 with less of your income. That's why the chart shows sort of a negative looking thing on the right-hand side. It means less of your income, a lesser share of your income could buy the same stuff. You had more purchasing power despite all the media noise about inflation. This shows what happened with real wages. So inflation adjusted, the bottom part, meaning the poorest people, had the highest increase in wages from 2019 to the end of 2023. All right, this comes from economist Aaron Dubé, who's a professor at major university, very highly regarded professor, and I've seen this data in various other formats. The bottom of the income distribution did relatively better than the top in terms of the wage gains. So you'll hear this theme in the news, and it's still out there, about how the working class has been abandoned by Democrats and all this other noise that you should ignore. The bottom did better than the rest in terms of their real wage gains. Their incomes grew faster than inflation, even more so for the bottom of the distribution than the top. When you look at a lot of numbers of how households did, this is how much these numbers grew from the end of 2019 through the middle of 2024, which is the latest data, quarterly data for many of these measures. Not everyone, some of them like stocks, you get daily information. So these are averages of where we were in the fourth quarter of 2019 and the second quarter of 2024. And these are nominal numbers, meaning not adjusted for inflation, because I've got the inflation at the bottom. This is how much these things cumulatively increased during that time. The net worth of the bottom 50% group grew 96%, stocks 70%. The 50th to 90th group, so that middle to upper middle class, 52%, GDP, 32%. That's the incomes or the size of the economy. Home prices, 27%. Two-thirds of households own their homes. Hourly wages, 26%. Inflation, 21%. Everything outgrew inflation. The aggregate measures like these are far better than they were in 2019, even adjusted for inflation. You always get the question in economics, are we better off than we were 4 years ago? So I think what the default position, or the way people started thinking about this, they got this narrative in their head that, of course we're better off than in the middle of the pandemic, but nobody blamed Trump for that. Somehow he got a pass for that year. If you take the Biden data and you compare it to when he started, of course things are much better than when Biden started, and it's not close. So if you say, are we better off than we 4 years ago? Of course we were. But even this is the part people don't understand. If you go back to right before the pandemic, the best month or quarter of the Trump era, we're better on 9 of the 12 measures than we were before the pandemic. And especially the ones that are about households, about their wages, about their GDP per household or income per household, about their net worth, the home values. All of these things are up, even adjusted for inflation. And so you could say the economy is better than even the vaunted 2019 economy on 9 of 12 key measures. In addition to kind of where we were, we also had economists opining on which policies would be better for people. Would you be better off under Harris or Trump? The big thing that Trump was proposing is the blocking immigrants. And I'll explain how critical immigrants are to our economy in a little bit. And then also the tariffs, which are a tax. Tariffs is essentially a middle-class tax. You tariff goods and the prices will be raised when you try to buy them. And so what economists said on the left-hand side is that the economy would grow a lot better under Harris. It would shrink a little bit from the baseline that they had. And then for Trump, though, it would shrink almost 10%, 9%. And in terms of inflation, that Harris, things would continue to improve, that inflation would fall. But because of mass deportation and other pieces, the inflation rate would get worse under Trump. And so you've got this situation of economists saying things will be worse under Trump. And then on the right-hand side, you have the change in the after-tax income. So even though Trump was proposing, extending his tax cuts and all of that, because of the tariffs, he was essentially offsetting that. The tariffs are a tax on the middle class. And so you see here that at the bottom of the distribution, that 0 to 20th percent, Harris was tremendously better. And for the 20 to 40th percent, way better than Trump. Only when you get over there to the top 5% or so did economists think that Trump would be better. And so or much better. So you really have a situation of, if the issue is the working class was warned that they would be worse off under Trump by pretty much every economist. These charts were coming out from all different economists. They were in the news. You couldn't miss them. Better off under the policies of Harris. And I didn't include it in this presentation, but when the Washington Post went through all the different policies of Trump and Harris, and in fact, if you didn't say who the policy was from, Harris's policies were much more popular, even with Republicans. The Harris policies absolutely destroyed the Trump in terms of popularity among Trump voters when they weren't given that information of whose policy they were. In terms of the deficit and debt, which we often talk about in these sessions, they gave this group, the CRFB, which is a very good source for this information, provided ranges. If you look at the central range, that's sort of what they thought would be most likely. Trump running much, much larger deficits than Harris. The tax cuts not going to be offset by the tariffs very much. And so this is whether you talk about where we were in the economy, which was better than 2019, Trump's best year. If you talk about what the economists said, they said that things would be better under Harris. And if you're looking at the deficits, they're saying you're going to have much lower deficits under Harris. The trifecta, current state, future state, and the deficits too. But, and this is the big one, for some reason, people do not like this economy at all, despite all the information I've given you. And this is a really interesting way to look at it. People that think their own finances are doing okay, this is from the Federal Reserve, so this is not a backwater here. 72% think their own finances are doing okay, and it's pretty consistent with where they were back before the pandemic. It's not particularly different. But look at the perception of the economy, thinking of the national economy as good or excellent. 22%. So they think their situation was good, but somehow everybody else's was bad. a phenomenon that even the best economists are struggling with. They don't exactly know why this is happening. And it's not a simple explanation. Everybody's probably got one that they feel more strongly about, but there is a lot going on in that gap. You've got the media that did a horrible job explaining the economy. I mean, most of you have probably not seen the slides or the information that I initially shared with you because the media didn't share it. And the Democrats often didn't talk it up because we're afraid that if we brag about the economy, some people will be offended. And Karl and I have talked about whether that's a good thing or not. I would say probably not, but we'll see. Right-wing propaganda. Clearly, there's a lot of people that are deliberately misinformed by Fox News and some of the other bubbles that the Republican voters are in, where they just don't know what's happening in the economy, and they often have the opposite. They just don't, they're being completely lied to about what's actually happening. And then Democrats and our strategy and messaging can always be better. So some mix of these variables and perhaps some others are at play in that difference. But so when we talk about the reality of the economy, superb. When you talk about the perception of the economy, very different. When it comes to key issues about why people voted the way they did, number one on the list was border security and immigration, where Trump polled far, far better. The red dot was way over there. Inflation and cost of living, even though we had more purchasing power in 2023, that wasn't the perception. The blue dot is closer to the red, but still trailing. And then economy overall, still the blue dot closer, but still trailing. And so things like protecting democracy and abortion likely helped the Democrats. You can see the huge gap there, but look at protecting democracy. This is probably shocking to most people that understand that Trump is clearly a threat to democracy. Republicans see Democrats as a threat to democracy, that, we're putting Trump through the ringer in the judicial system or something. They have a different view about what protecting democracy means than Democrats. And so those numbers are very close together, even though you would expect to see them incredibly far apart. Now, as of tonight, the vote share is very close, obviously. Trump does not have the majority of the popular vote as of tonight. He's just under. Now, this doesn't mean anything in terms of the victory, and I'm not saying that. This is strictly the number count. He does not have a majority of the popular votes, in part because of a lot of people did vote for third parties in cases. And so Harris is behind. The Democrat turnout is probably going to end up about 7%-ish below where it was in the last election, whereas the Republicans are up about 3%. So that's kind of what happened is the Democrats didn't turn out the way we did for Biden, exactly where it ends up, but most of the vote is counted down. Now, interestingly, in perspective, the number that Trump has is a very low percent of the popular vote historically. It was lower than a long list of presidents here. He's got lower than Biden in 2020, Obama in 2012, Obama in 2008, George W. Bush in 2004, H.W. Bush in 88, Reagan in 84. So there are also some other real blowouts where Nixon and Lyndon Johnson got over 60% of the popular vote. So this is if you ever hear people say, oh, I've got a mandate to do X, Y, or Z, not really. This was an incredibly, thin difference in the popular vote. Now, when it comes to why, kind of what happened in the details of the voting, there is a really amazing story here. And then you can put as much complexity as you want on it, but let's look at what happened here by race. And so this chart shows different slices of the electorate, the 2020 vote share that the Democrats got and the 2024 vote share that Democrats got based on the NBC exit poll comparison. So there are going to be some variation in these exit polls, but this is so obvious a story that it's going to hold up most likely. Look at the overall, the whites, 70% of the electorate barely budged net. No change, 41% went for the Democrats. Black, 87% became 85%, a small shift, important shift, but small, relatively speaking, in terms of percent. But look at the Latino vote. 13% shift in Latinos. That's huge. 7% in Asian, but you can see the Asians are about 3% of the electorate, whereas Latinos about 12. slightly larger than the black share of the vote. So that was your decisive factor, was the Latinos shifting Republican. Now, why was that? We'll need more data to know exactly why it was. Was it immigration? Was it abortion? Many Latinos are Catholic. About 42% or so of Latinos are Catholic and may have actually supported Trump in the blocking of abortion. But what that does is that tells you that, you know, these other factors that are in there are very colored by that Latino shift. So when we look at family income, for example, down at the bottom, under 50K shifted 8%. That's a big shift toward Republicans. But that's driven by, since the whites and blacks didn't really shift, you know, how much of that was just the Latinos. It's hard to know that right now. We don't have all the data we'll need to make those decisions to see how big were the splits within each of these groups. I'll be looking for it. The 50 to 100K, 11% shift toward Republicans. But for the over 100K, +9 for Democrats. So an interesting shift of where the working class and the middle class shifting toward Republicans and the upper part shifting toward Democrats. And this has been going on in terms of the education level, which is sort of a proxy for income. The shift has been going on for a long time. Democrats have been getting more of the educated, the college educated people, and then the Republicans are getting more of the college or less educated people. About a third of the population has a college degree, about a third. And so this favors Republicans in that the more they, you know, it's a bigger pool of college education or less, some college or less, as opposed to the bachelor's degree and up. In the swing states, the votes weren't tremendously different in terms of the number. Arizona, Georgia, you go down the line, you're talking about pretty small shifts in the percent of people. A total of 120,000 people across the swing states. And this was a few days ago, so these numbers have probably moved. But still, a very small shift in the number of votes in the swing states. As you would expect, they were supposed to be incredibly close. And Harris won more votes than Biden in 4 of the 7 battlegrounds and was basically tied with Biden across all 7. So this is Biden and Harris, over that time, very similar. The theory that James Surowiecki, an author, has about this is that the Dems stayed home in states where their votes didn't matter. Meaning if you're in Chicago, you may have stayed home. So I haven't gotten into all the details at the city level and all that, but that we'll see if that theory actually holds true. But it wasn't the swing states where Harris got almost as many votes as Biden did. As we've been talking about, the Democrats tend to be much more informed about issues than Republicans. What this chart says is that, for example, it says an assertion, whether that assertion is true or false. The first one, violent crime rates are at or near all-time highs in most major American cities. That's actually false. Democrats knew that, and they voted for, the people that knew that voted for Harris. The people that didn't know that voted for Republicans. Same thing with inflation falling over the last year near its historical average. That's true. Democrats knew it, Republicans didn't. People that knew it voted Harris. So same idea. You could go down probably any variable you want. You're going to see this trend of the Republicans are just misinformed about most things. And the Democrats are much more informed people about most issues than Republicans. This phenomenon was not only US based. You've probably been hearing that all over the world, incumbents got beat up, in part because of people don't like inflation or for other factors. But the US was no exception, but we didn't do as badly. The incumbent party did not get hit as hard here as it did in other countries. This right side of the chart where that red dot is where we ended up. And then these other, the darker gray dots are other countries that had elections, and they saw bigger drop-offs for those incumbent parties. The question is, all right, if it seems like there is a misinformation problem that Republican voters don't actually know what's happening, they actually would have liked Harris's policies better if they knew what they were. They liked them better when they were presented to them. It's how do we get that message out, and how do you make sure that people understand all these things and it's really gelling in their brain? And Bill likes to spend time. He's a masochist in some ways. He goes into these groups where he's surrounded by MAGA just to argue with them. And he'll tell you about it, some of his adventures over there, but they won't believe any of this. There is no CBO chart you can show them. You can show them a TV program. I think Jesus could present this to them and they would say Jesus is lying. All right. So there is no, it's very difficult to get to them. And so you're not likely to get there. So the question is, what do you do to affect the persuadable people and generally strengthen the Democratic brand as much as possible, to put yourself in the best possible place? And this is the soul searching the Democrats are going to do over the next couple of years. And Karl and I didn't say this at the beginning. We're both CPAs. We spent a lot of time in corporations over our lives. The basics of strategy is you have a mission statement that says, here's what we stand for, what our values are. Here are a couple examples from some of the most successful companies in the world, Apple and Google. And they talk in terms of the customers, to bring the best user experience to our customer through innovative hardware, software, and services. And probably most people on this call have an iPhone. And then on the Google side, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Implied in that statement is to people, to customers. And then also the goals. What is it that the Democrats specifically want to accomplish for people? Like, we all know that Republicans are going to cut taxes. Everybody knows it. But it's not so simple when you ask people, what do Democrats stand for? It's a tougher message. You've got some healthcare awareness out there. You've got education. But what exactly do we stand for? And how do we say this is what we are standing for so that everybody knows it? Part of that strategy process is a diagnosis, analyzing the internal situation, meaning the strengths and weaknesses you have in your organization, and then also the external environment that you're in. You know, the political, it's called PESL. It's an acronym: political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. What's going on in the environment that we need to understand in order to come up with our strategy? In the initiatives, then you say, these are the legislative plans you have, and these are the executive orders that we're going to need. Here are the things that we are trying to accomplish. And so I hope that one of the takeaways for the Democrats is that we get good at strategy while we are in the wilderness for at least the next couple of years, with Republicans running all three branches of the government and having, also, I would say, a very favorable media environment too. The fourth branch is very favorable to them, and in many cases did not tell people about all the good news about the economy, choosing instead to talk in terms of all these economic crises that we'll show you just were not really happening. So one of the other things Republicans have gotten incredibly good at is they will define the Democrat brand for us. They will say we are weak on the border, and the media will pick that up and we won't have an answer. Because in our hearts, we want more immigrants to come in, because that makes the country and everybody richer in a variety of ways, not just financial. But we don't say that. So we come up with bad arguments about border security instead of saying we should get more immigrants here. And in fact, by letting a lot of immigrants in, we boosted the economy and made everybody as rich as possible. And all of you guys at the bottom of the income distribution, you did fine. Those immigrants didn't hurt you. You know, we didn't talk in those terms. We were always on the defensive. We've got to learn to get on offense, and you do that when you have a strategy. And here's some also setting the terms of the media debate. The Democrat, and kind of what I was saying, the Republicans will put us in a box, like the debates about border security. And it shouldn't be about border security. Immigrants make us richer should be the box we're arguing in. But we got caught into the border security is the critical issue. Stopping immigrants is how you should be measuring things. That isn't the right answer. And so we've got to resist that, and you resist that by being in front of your message and on strategy, on message all the time. Also, Americans became the richest ever. Not only did I showed you that chart about how wages and net worth far outgrew inflation. You know, stock market's up 70%. 60% of the people own stocks. 65% of people own homes. You know, almost everybody that works earns a wage. All that's great news. Did we tell people this? No. We said, look, inflation's coming down. It's like, well, no, because most people realize prices are way higher than they were. So the argument is, you're better off. You have more purchasing power despite that. And we're working on the problem, or the Fed is working on the problem of inflation. So, and the last one is the home prices. You've heard a lot about housing crises, but home price gains help the majority of people. And most mortgages, the fixed rates that you're paying, were set before the pandemic. So if you got that average 26% wage increase and you got that same fixed rate mortgage, you're saying, boy, I love inflation. Give me more of that. I will pause there. And before we go into the labor market and talk about that, well, let me mention this last slide, then we'll go into that. So you want to make sure that people also know the economy does better under Democrats. Historically, the economy has done far better, but Republicans poll better on it. If we fix nothing before the next election, we should fix this so that everybody knows it. 10 of the last 11 recessions started under Republicans. Nearly all the job creation of the last 3 presidents was under Democratic presidents. All the major measures get better under Democrats. They get worse under Republicans, mainly because they go into recessions. And Biden has that lowest unemployment rate and the highest real wages of any president going back to 1964. And he's added to that historical Democratic Party outperformance. People don't know this, and they should. It's super important. All right, so now I will stop there, and let's open it up for discussion. Let's do 10 minutes or so. And Karl, I suspect there's a lot going on in the chat, so hopefully you've been reading that, and I'll start taking a look at it too.
So let me speak to this for a little bit. What I'm shocked about is during COVID, we basically put our entire economy into a depression. And because of the lessons learned under Obama, we spent a lot of money out of the Treasury and basically bounced back, I think, basically within a year. So it's like anything where you dump a whole bunch of money going after the same amount of goods, in fact, less because of supply chain issues. Inflation should have been expected. Now, there's an easy argument to say some of that inflation was probably people grabbing for more of the cash pie than they should have, but it should have been there. Would you rather have 5 years of depression like we had under Obama, or would you rather have a year? I prefer a year, but that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, one of the good lessons from this is that when you put money in people's pockets, the economy bounces back a lot quicker. And we struggled with the Great Recession. So under Obama, everybody thought you needed to have a shovel-ready project. Another case of the Republicans defining the debate. The Austerians saying you've gotta be mindful of the deficit. You can't run a big deficit, and then at the same time yelling, this is the slowest economy or recovery on record. Democrats have to get in front of that, and we did in this case. Trump, to his credit, ran a huge deficits during his term, and then Biden did in his first year, and then it's been dropping since then, although it's back up a little bit this year. We'll go through some of that fiscal piece here. I'm looking at some of the comments, and I heard there were some people saying I didn't get raises. We're not saying that everybody got a raise. We're saying that on average, every group did better and has more purchasing power than they had in 2019. So when people say, I don't like this economy, but they like 2019, they don't have it's not a real reason, it's a perception. Or you're one of those people that has it, but that didn't do as well. But the vast majority of people had that additional purchasing power across the income spectrum. And so one of the comments was, I didn't hear about anybody getting a raise. Well, they did. Corporations, what happened, and think of it this way, is a lot of people that were working really lousy jobs got big raises to go work in warehouses. Like, they were making minimum wage, and then they went at $7 or $10 an hour, and they went to 15, 20, 25 an hour working in the Amazon warehouses. I mean, that's a small part of it, but that phenomenon was working in a lot of places. If you change jobs in corporations, chances are you got a really big raise because they were desperate for people as the economy was recovering and getting that economy started again. So there was an opportunity there for 2 or 3 years to get giant wages, and that kept up or exceeded inflation, and overall has exceeded inflation. All the charts that you're seeing here, they all are all cited to, let me show you the next one just for fun here. They'll say things like Fred. This is the Federal Reserve Economic Database. All of the charts have things like that in them. So like here, for example, let's go back to this one, source data, Fred, all these numbers are in the Federal Reserve. I generate them myself. I know where to get them. This is what they are. I share these all the time with economists online. They know these are the numbers. These numbers also from Fred. You can get all this data from the Federal Reserve database. And so you'll see charts as we get into this in detail and we go through these numbers, you'll see charts that look like this, that have the Fred on them. So just FYI on the sourcing. Oh, there's a comment on
Hey,
Social
David,
Security. Yep, go ahead.
real quick on the subject of eggs. The great thing about the eggs is the huge jump in egg prices had nothing to do with inflation. It had everything to do with a large pandemic running through the flocks.
Yes.
The
Yes.
timing was horrible, but it had nothing to do with well, it had little to do with inflation. You cannot generate $7 eggs because of inflation. You can't do it when like a third of the flock dies. It was stunning.
Yep. It's a horrible timing, but that's where the messaging has to be. It has to get out there. And also, eggs are a very small part of what people buy, but it's symbolic, right? That's one thing Republicans do really well is they use symbols. Like I can show you charts all day, but when you have a symbol like an egg, people can see it and it can be tangible to them. And so, what you can do to offset that is you can create symbols of people that are saying, I've had a tremendous wage. You put them on commercials saying, look at the huge wages I'm getting. You have a group of people talking about how awesome their wages are, smiling and laughing. We didn't do stuff like that. And we've got to do better at explaining these things. But eggs are a tiny part. And you know what? You can actually survive without them. Shocking. You can actually live without eggs. You can buy something else and eat it. But people don't want to. But still, you can. And so there's a lot of noise in the system that is just not real. And people that are stuck in social media bubbles are hearing it over and over again, and the news media echoes it, and it becomes a reality for some people, even though it's just false. It's just not the vast majority of people are way better off than they were in 2019 when they all allegedly loved the Trump economy. And by the way, Trump was happy to let everybody know that, right? He would say, this is the greatest economy ever. He started saying that in 2018. 2019 was better than 2018. And 2023 was better than 2019. So what is that? Therefore, QED, if that were Trump, he would have been saying every day, this is the greatest economy ever. What are you people complaining about? And they seem to like that. They seem to like being slapped around by Trump. I don't know if Democrats can get away with the same thing, but I'd like to see a Democrat with the guts to get up there and say, listen, things are great. And you should enjoy them. And here's why they're so great. And here's what we're doing to make them even better. What else have we got in the chat? Karl, have you seen anything you want to comment on?
Yeah, somebody mentioned gas prices. Now, gas prices nationally have been coming down since April of this year. They were up close to $3.70 a gallon nationally, and they're down to $3.05 nationally right now. Almost half the country is paying less than $3 a gallon for gas. In the Chicago area, you go up to Wisconsin, head out to DuPage County, over to Indiana, you're under $3 a gallon.
That's right. And this is part of, and there are a couple of comments on this too, is that people see prices, they don't see wages. Like Paul Krugman shared a slide just the other day where he had wages outgrowing inflation, but he said, inflation is Biden's fault and wages are my success. In other words, I'm the reason that my wages went up, but inflation is somebody punishing me. And so they don't realize they are related. In other words, you can't have inflation. This is a point that people don't get. You can't have inflation if people don't have the money to buy the stuff. If you don't have money to buy stuff, the prices will fall because nothing's moving. And so that's a fundamental thing. The money is out there. If prices are going up, it's because businesses understand people are buying stuff like crazy off the shelves. And that's a general point that people miss. You can't have it without the wages, without the income. All right, Karl, do you want to take this next section, and do you want me to You want to just tell me when you want me to flip the slides?
Hold on,
Okay, we'll start with
before
the
you do, can
slide.
I throw my 2 cents?
Yeah, sure.
All right. They should, someone should just you're right about someone should go up there and say something. They should like say, I'm struggling to put food on the food on my plate for my children, and yet you guys are living the life of luxury and not even caring about the people people like us who are struggling to make dead ends meet, if that's the right word for it,
Yep.
to put food on the table for our children.
Yep.
If not, do you think I said that right?
You did. Your tone is perfect for, I can see it as a Republican commercial. And Democrats are terrified of that statement, but you can do the other side of that argument too. You put all those people in a room talking it up. They're at the table, they're in the bar, hanging out at the table. They got their trucker hats on. They're going, damn, I just got a 50% raise versus last year. Heck, I can pay for stuff that's so easy now. I can't believe it. This Biden guy, he's got something going on. Do a commercial like that. I mean, why not? What have you got to lose? People, because that's closer to reality than what you just said. There are some people that are suffering. We are not here to say they aren't suffering, but it's clear if you have a choice between what Democrats are going to do for you and what Republicans are going to do for you, the Democrats are going to do a lot more for you. And so this idea that you're going to be mad at Democrats because they didn't do enough and you're going to go vote for Trump is just crazy. And that's part of what you have to message people on. Why would you go over there when you're going to be way better off with us?
I agree with you on that. And if they had to get a super PAC of themselves, of rich people, they should pick the Patriotic Millionaires PAC. Have you ever heard of them?
I haven't, but I can imagine such an entity exists. I mean, somebody donated all that money.
Well, if you don't know, they're a group of selfless billionaires who are fighting for people like us.
Good. Yeah.
That's what they are.
Yeah.
And the Democrats should at least hit their help.
Yeah.
Help, if you know what I mean.
No, and just so you know, when we pause like this, if other people would like to speak up and share, we can certainly, please do that. Don't be afraid to talk up. If you're giving a long speech, we may cut you off. So I would ask that you keep it brief or you ask questions, and Karl and I or others will try to answer them.
Can I add something?
Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sorry. This is Liz Dunn from Columbus. How y'all doing?
Good.
My point is that this is a friend of mine said this, and I bet she did not vote Democratic in the end because of this point. She had been watching, what Kamala Harris did on interviews and so forth, and speeches and whatever commercials there were, not many. And she didn't hear her talking about what they were going to do for poor people. She did not hear her say that she was going to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And this lady and I both live in an assisted living facility, and we use a program called the Medicaid Assisted Living Waiver, where we have slightly better incomes than Social Security usually does for people, but we still have needs that we have to be helped with, like bathing, dressing, toileting, whatever. And so Medicaid, in essence, waives your income. It can't be too high, but waives your income in favor of helping you and letting you live in an assisted living facility where you can get help with those things, or living in your own apartment, but still getting services that come in and help you bathe, dress, whatever your needs are.
Sure.
And we wanted to hear something about her protecting things that exist now and going for even bigger and broader programs, because the people that, as that lady pointed out before, the ones that didn't get in the chat, that didn't get a raise, I mean, those people are suffering, and not just the working poor, but the poor as well. And so we need to hear more about that and kind of appeal to people who are succeeding, better natures, like saying, what about, if this happened to your grandmother, that kind of thing. We need to use some emotional triggers as well as Trump did.
Those are great points. I think in commercials along those lines would have been excellent. And the great You use symbols, use real people that have a problem and show that the Democrats are going to do something about that. And I think that's you're right on. I think that's a great piece. And ideally, if we have our strategy and our platform, everybody knows what it is, then that flows naturally from our strategies of what we're trying to communicate. So yeah, you're right on.
But you're forgetting one little thing, Elizabeth. There are some people that are actually more happy being homeless than having a home.
Okay, but I'm talking about people who do want a home, whatever it has to be. People that are homeless, that want to be homeless, that's their personal choice and decision. And if they don't want any help, that's fine. But I would say most homeless people probably do want help.
Yeah, I agree with you on that part. But David, this ain't the best time to ask the question, right? Bill, this ain't the best right time to ask the question, right?
Jeffrey,
Can I?
Later. We have another part of the presentation to go through.
Okay,
Karl, but at the end of that would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just say something quickly, Bill?
Go ahead.
Okay, I was just at the Commercial Club today. That's a business organization in the city of Chicago, and David Axelrod, who worked under Obama, and Mike Murphy, I think, who is had worked under many Republican presidents and whatever. To summarize it real quickly, somebody said, I think the woman that just spoke, and I put it in the chat, said what David Axelrod said today. He said he thinks that the Democrats focused on the educated population, which is 1/3 of the population, and didn't use language that talked to the everyday lower middle class, working class people. And just as she said, that needed to know what we're moving forward on is about the economy means you can eat. The economy means you can live in a decent place, not own a home, which again, in Chicago, they just sold two more buildings for $4 million, two more homes for $4 million. That's not what David said. And he teaches, in addition to having worked for Obama, he teaches at the University of Chicago, where the most wealthiest people in the world go. But he said that what was missing, and what it still puzzles me, is how the multi-billionaire class that supported Trump was able to focus on the talking about what your vote will mean for your everyday life, and what he also said was that many of them are used to people working for them, corporations, and so they know how to speak the language to workers, and that workers, everyday workers, non-union workers, people who don't have representation to help them impact their lives and are still living on minimum wage. And Illinois has one of the best minimum wages, but some of them suck. And that was not talked about. So I think that the economy is not one thing for all of us. And David Axelrod and Murphy said that was one of the things that when they did the percentage of the percentage of educated people in this country, the higher percentage voted for the Democrat, voted for Kamala. The highest percentage of lower educated, particularly those with less than a college degree. No, he said less than a college degree, voted 2/3 more for Trump. So
right.
I mean, Harris was using Cheney to chase like disaffected, wealthy Republicans. That's not a huge block of people, right?
But it wasn't just Harris, though, David. It wasn't. That's what he said. It wasn't Harris. He was very clear. It wasn't her. This was a determination by the Democratic Party. They determined what the message would be, and using his terms, who the political targets would be. That was not
whoever made that decision made a poor decision, because getting some Republican-leaning CPAs who don't like Donald Trump to vote for Harris, that's not a big enough demographic.
Right? I know, but I'm just saying again, we have to be words have power, and he did not say Kamala. He said the Democratic Party itself did not structure itself in a way to communicate to lower income, and again, he said the marginal class, those people that during the pandemic lost jobs that were not recreated. I know in Chicago on the South Side, I can tell you there were hundreds of those that were never recreated, and they are homeless. Many of them have been homeless. So yeah, I mean, again, it's a structural thing that the Democratic Party has to look at and determine how it puts its language out around the economy. Because when they say, and he left it with, the economy is better, and the answer and his response was, better for whom?
Right. And I understand that it's kind of beyond the scope of this call tonight, and I came a little late, so if you covered this early on, I apologize if I missed it, but I don't know if we can spend any time on this. If we don't have time for it, I understand this is probably not the place, but it's important that we figure out what that message is on the economic front, and that we do that quickly, because 2026 is not that far away. And if you don't have a cogent message in the next few months, you're not going to have a lot of time to craft one and to sort of roll it out. So if anyone has any brilliant ideas about how the Democrats sell to an electorate that they're the better party in economics for the overwhelming majority of Americans, I'd like to hear that. I mean, it's true. I just don't know how to convey that, you know?
I got one.
All right, hold on. We need to step back to the principles of this meeting.
Okay.
Which is a fiscal
Like I said,
discussion.
if it's beyond the scope of this meeting, that's fine. I get it.
I am more than happy to extend this meeting into the evening. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, I'm not trying to keep us here
We have
till
the
1
rest of this
a.m. I
discussion.
get it.
But
You
let's
know,
get back to our main
All right.
topic, please.
So these are excellent points that people are bringing up. I'll mention one thing that we can learn from. Sometimes you learn from your opponent, right? And what did Trump do that cut right through all the baloney that the working class heard really clearly? There were four things: no taxes on overtime, no taxes on tips, which Harris mirrored, tariffs, which unfortunately, even though they're a tax on the middle class, they don't understand what a tariff is. They think tariffs are good for them. They protect their jobs. And then immigration, they erroneously think that blocking immigrants is going to help them. So overtime and tips is a legitimate tax policy to help the working class. I think Democrats should have gone with that. I thought that was smart that Harris mimicked that. But the tariffs and immigration are both things that are going to hurt the working class, the vast majority. And so those are things that Democrats have to make sure everybody knows going forward. And we have a lot of educating to do. But what we learned from Trump is those messages are effective with the working class. No taxes on income that matters to them, overtime, tips, and tariffs to protect them, even though they're not really protective. They actually hurt people. And immigration, same thing. Immigrants make you much richer, but they don't believe that. And so we've got a lot to do if we want to be a reality-based party. And so what I've indicated here, to the point that the gentleman said he came in a little bit late, come up with a mission statement. I'm not saying this is the perfect mission statement, but Democrats help families achieve financial success by job creation, affordable health care and education, providing middle-class tax cuts, and supporting Social Security and Medicare. Boom. I'm happy if people come up with a better one, but the Democratic Party should lock their smartest people in a room, take Axelrod, take the others, lock them in a room, don't let them out until they've got a mission statement. That's the kind of thing that a good strategy group does, and it all flows from your mission. And as we talked about the strategy piece. So Karl, let's move on into the labor market, and I will turn the slides when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. So we continue to have good job growth this year. Job growth in October was pretty low, at 12,000 jobs added in October. On the other hand, if you look back at Trump's 2019 best economy ever, in February of 2019, we added 5,000 jobs. And we added less than 100,000 jobs in 3 or 4 months in 2019. So a single low job month was an anomaly, but the fact that it hit right before the election, I don't think was well understood. But we continue to have good job gains, as you show. Since we regained the pre-pandemic level, we've averaged 238,000 jobs per month, which is better than any year under Trump. We currently have about 6.7 million jobs more than we had at the pre-pandemic peak. Hopefully these continue to grow with the deportations that are being threatened. I'm worried. Moving to the next slide. And this just shows that the job growth, which peaked when we're recovering from all the jobs lost during the pandemic, has slowed down, but continues to be in a solid range. And this is job growth. Obama's second term averaged 216,000 jobs a month. Trump pre-pandemic was averaging 180,000. Over the 4 years, we actually lost over 2 million jobs under Trump. So we averaged a loss of 57,000 jobs. First president we've lost jobs on a net basis since Herbert Hoover. But people remember that, the economy was so great 4 years ago when we lost those 22 million jobs in 2 months. Partially because we did come up, and mostly the Democrats in the CARES Act, threw a whole bunch of money at the newly unemployed who were told to stay home and not work, blew up the deficit, but provided income to people that would not have otherwise had it. So the people with 22 million lost jobs, most of those people did not suffer greatly. This next one is a interesting slide about job growth under the last 6 presidents. And basically, we had decent job growth under Reagan, and so starting right after him is probably a little unfair. But this basically says that since, the first President Bush took office, we've had 51 million jobs that were added. About 50 million of those were added under Democratic presidents. And because of the losses under Trump, only about 1 million were added under Republican presidents. We go to the next slide, which is the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate, which we're used to talking about as the U3 rate. The U3 rate are people who have not worked. This is a phone survey of 50, 60,000 people. The percentage of people who have not worked in the prior month, but looked for work in the prior month. And so that's the U3 rate. And at 4.1% is pretty darn low. The U6 rate is people who haven't worked in the prior month. Well, it's a combination of two things. Number one, it's people who haven't worked in the prior month, but have looked for jobs in the prior year, plus people who are working part-time who want full-time employment. Now, most people who are working part-time want part-time employment, but about a fourth of the people that are working part-time would like full-time jobs. The unemployment rate, we can see here that it exploded in 2020 when the pandemic hit, came down. When Trump took office, it was 4.7%. When he left office, it was 6.4%. So when Biden took office, it was 6.4%. And it's currently 4.0, 4.1%. So we're making progress. It's come up a little bit recently, but not bad. Unemployment under Obama, I'd have to look that up. I know it started high because we were still in the Great Recession. Then it came down. I'll look it up real quick here. See, when Obama took office, the unemployment rate was in January of 2009, the unemployment rate was 7.8%. And when he left office, it was 4.7%. Again, the household survey numbers were not great. Again, October numbers were not great for jobs, whether it's or the percentage of the population that was working. Not terrible. Don't get me wrong. We added payroll jobs. It wasn't as good as some of the more recent data. What this shows is that population grew. The people who reported they were employed shrunk. Again, there's a lot of variability in the monthly household survey numbers. And so this isn't necessarily the start of a bad trend. But it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few months, whether this is a start of a bad trend or just an anomaly. Partially, we had the couple of hurricanes and the Boeing strike and a few other things that hit that caused the employment numbers for October to be lower than they would have otherwise been. And the employment to population ratio for prime age people, which is 25 to 54. So most of the students are under 25. Most of the retirees are over 54. And it basically is as high as it was at its peak under Trump. We're still in good shape on these numbers. And we go to ratio of job openings to unemployment. There's a few more job openings than there is number of people who are unemployed. And so that's a good thing, but it's down a lot versus what it was a few months ago. Hiring rate is slowing, and there's a lot of uncertainty right now as to what the change in the presidential administrations will mean. And this is really more a political thing, which doesn't really count, but the The Republicans like to talk about the fact that all the jobs under Biden are part-time or government, or people have to have multiple jobs, et cetera, mass layoffs. And what we see here is that the share of the jobs that are part-time was about the same. The share of the jobs that were government jobs was about the same, a little lower than under Trump. Multiple job holders, the percentage or multiple job holders was about the same. And layoffs were a little bit lower under Biden. So basically, good numbers. And we'll see now. People were talking here about help for the safety net, the SNAP benefits, food stamp benefits, as well as Medicaid. And one of the first things that the Trump administration appointees want to do is make major cuts in eligibility for SNAP benefits and Medicaid benefits. So they want to cut a lot of spending in those areas. We'll see whether Congress lets them do that.
Before we go into the next section, we usually take a break around 8 o'clock. We usually do about 10 minutes or so. So right now it is 8:14. Should we come back around 8:20, 8:22, let's say?
Sounds good. Okay.
All right.